Footsteps in the attic. Catherine, 45, Ohio. I have lived in this house for more than a decade, long enough for its walls to feel like the backdrop of my life, yet never familiar enough to bring true comfort. The structure is old, older than the roads that lead into town, older than the wires that snake along the neighborhood poles. Its wooden bones groan at the slightest change in temperature. Its windows rattle at the push of the wind, and the floorboards bend with the weight of memory. People say such quirks are only natural in a house this ancient, but I have long since stopped convincing myself with easy answers. There are noises here that don't belong to settling beams or shifting weather. They belong to something else entirely. It always begins in the same place, the attic. I don't go up there often, not anymore. The stairs leading to it are steep, narrow, coated in dust that clings to the soles of shoes. A dangling rope switch controls a single light bulb that never burns steady. Its glow trembles, thin and jaundiced, casting more shadows than clarity. Even before the first strange sound, I disliked that attic. The air up there feels stale, as if it hasn't been breathed in by anything living for years. Cobwebs cling like gauze between the beams, and the insulation has long since frayed, exposing tufts of yellowed fiberglass that shed into the air like brittle pollen. It smells of damp wood and something metallic, faint but ever present, like the lingering tang of rusted nails. The footsteps began on a winter night. The cold had pressed itself against the house, every draft squeezing through cracks around the window frames. I had just settled into bed when I heard them, slow, deliberate steps overhead. Not the quick scurry of mice, not the restless scratching of raccoons. These were heavier. They carried weight, measured pressure. Heel then toe, heel then toe. Each one made the old timbers creak in protest, the sound spreading downward into the ceiling above my head. I froze under the covers, every muscle stiffening, my ears straining to follow the rhythm. The attic has no floorboards laid down for walking, just exposed beams and insulation. Yet the steps moved across it with confidence, back and forth, as if pacing. They would stop. Silence would swell. Then, after a breathless pause, they would resume, returning the way they came. At first I tried to reason it away. A branch knocking against the roof, maybe, or snow slipping down the shingles. But even then I knew better. These sounds had weight, presence. The house shifted in response to them, groaning beneath each tread. Nights blurred together, and the pattern repeated. Always after midnight, when the rest of the neighborhood slept. I would lie awake, the ceiling pressing down on me with invisible weight, listening to whoever, or whatever, restlessly paced above. The sound became so familiar that I could almost map the movements. Starting near the chimney, pausing near the far corner where an old trunk sat abandoned, then circling back again. Over and over, until the hours bled toward dawn. Eventually, curiosity gnawed at fear. One evening, armed with a flashlight, I climbed the narrow steps into the attic. The bulb swayed on its string, casting weak arcs of yellow light. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by my movement. I stood in the center of the cramped space, listening. Silence. The kind of silence that presses against the eardrums, so complete it feels like a ringing. No steps, no movement, only the faint tick of the house cooling around me. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the beams. Boxes stacked in corners, their cardboard softened with moisture. The old trunk, its brass clasps corroded. Rolled carpets leaned against one wall, their patterns obscured by grime. Nothing stirred. Nothing revealed itself. Yet the longer I stood there, the more the air thickened. My skin prickled, the tiny hairs at the back of my neck rising as if brushed by unseen fingers. Then the steps began again. They started behind me. The first creak was subtle, almost lost in the hum of the bulb, but I recognized it instantly. Heel. Toe. Slow, deliberate. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dust, but there was nothing. Just open beams and shadows stretching away into corners. Another step followed, closer this time, echoing through the wood beneath my feet. The air turned icy, a sharp contrast against the heat of my breath. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, something moving, something pacing, its presence undeniable. I fled that night, stumbling down the ladder and slamming the hatch shut behind me. The sound of the footsteps followed, muffled but insistent, continuing their endless path overhead as I locked myself in my room below. Since then, I haven't dared return. The attic remains closed, but it doesn't matter. The steps never stopped. Each night, they resume, steady and patient. I've tried to drown them out with music, with the television, but the rhythm always finds a way through. The house itself seems to carry the sound, its beams transmitting each creak like a heartbeat. Sometimes, when exhaustion overtakes me and sleep finally drags me under, I dream of the attic. I dream of standing in that stale air, of watching the bulb flicker until the shadows move on their own. In the dreams, the footsteps always come closer. I wake before they reach me, but the echo remains lodged in my chest, pulsing like an aftershock. I have begun to notice changes, too. Dust disturbed in strange patterns, as if something had traced a path across the beams. Cobwebs torn where no one has walked. The old trunk shifting slightly, its lid not quite aligned. Once, I found the rope of the light switch swaying gently as if freshly touched, though the air around it was still. Neighbors tell me old houses hold memories, that sometimes the past seeps into the present, repeating itself like a broken record. I wonder what memory mine is trying to relive, whose footsteps I hear night after night, what restless weight presses down upon the attic beams, pacing, never ceasing. I don't think it wants to be forgotten, and I know one night the steps won't stop overhead. They'll find their way down the narrow stairs into the hall and through the house that has never quite felt like mine. When that night comes, I'll have nowhere left to hide. Until then, I lie awake in the dark, listening to the creak of wood above me, every sound a reminder that I am not alone here. The attic waits. The footsteps continue, and they are growing closer. The Mirror Woman, Michael, 28, Texas. I have lived in this house my whole life. My parents bought it when I was a child, a modest single-story home with wide hallways and a layout that feels stretched, as though the rooms were designed to echo. The walls are thick, holding the dry heat of Texas summers and the brittle cold of its rare winters. Everything about the house has aged with me, from the creaking wood in the living room floor to the stained carpet in the den. But the mirror has always felt older than the house itself. It hangs in the hallway, directly across from the door to my childhood bedroom. A tall, oval thing framed in carved wood, its varnish dulled by time, its glass never quite clean no matter how much polish touches it. My mother used to say it was antique, passed down through her side of the family. She liked its character, the way it gave the hallway an air of something historic. To me, it always felt misplaced, like a portal shoved into a wall where it didn't belong. When I was younger, I avoided looking into it at night. Something about the glass seemed too dark, too deep, as though it didn't reflect the hallway so much as swallow it. My reflection never felt entirely mine. Its eyes looked back with too much patience, its movements always half a breath too late. I learned to lower my head when I walked past, staring at the floor, letting the edges of the mirror blur into my peripheral vision. The first time I saw her, I was 17. It was late, closer to morning than midnight. I had woken to get a glass of water. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator, and the air carried the faint smell of dust and the faint metallic tang of old pipes. I padded down the hallway, bare feet brushing against the cool linoleum, when my eyes flicked toward the mirror despite myself. She was standing behind me. Not in the hallway itself. There was no one there when I spun around. Only in the glass, a tall, thin woman, her hair long and dark, her face pale and blurred as though submerged underwater. Her body was angled toward me, but her head tilted slightly, unnaturally, the way broken branches lean after a storm. I froze. The air thickened in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I blinked once and she was gone. My reflection returned, wide-eyed, terrified, clutching the glass of water in trembling hands. I told myself it was exhaustion, that the brain, half dreaming, conjures images and shadows. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. But from then on, I walked faster past the mirror at night, keeping my eyes averted. Years passed. I went to college, moved into an apartment, tried to forget the strange unease of that hallway. But life has a way of pulling you back into the places you dread. After my father passed away, I returned to live with my mother to help with the house, and the mirror waited. The second time I was 24. I was walking to the bathroom, the house dark except for the dim yellow glow of a night light. The hallway smelled faintly of mothballs and mildew, that stale odor of a home too old to fully scrub clean. As I passed, I felt the prickle of awareness, the undeniable pull to look. I glanced, just for a second. She was closer. This time, I saw her face more clearly. Her skin was colorless, stretched too tightly over sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were hollow, sunken black, and yet they locked onto mine through the glass with dreadful precision. She didn't move, not even to blink, but her presence pressed into me, heavy and suffocating. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over myself, heart hammering. The mirror showed only her. Not the hallway, not me. Just her figure standing in a space that seemed deeper than the house allowed, as though the reflection stretched into another world. When I blinked, when I dared to look again, the mirror was empty. My reflection had returned, pale, trembling, breath fogging in the cold that seemed to seep from nowhere. I tried to ignore it. Tried to tell myself it was grief, stress, an overactive imagination feeding on sleepless nights. But the more I dismissed it, the more insistent it became. The appearances grew frequent. I'd catch glimpses in the corner of my eye, her figure standing behind me as I brushed my teeth, or lurking in the far corner when I walked past in daylight. Once, I swore I saw her hand press against the inside of the glass, long fingers splayed, nails blackened, leaving no smudge behind. The smell of the hallway began to change. Not just mildew now, but something sharper, metallic, like the coppery scent of blood. The air felt heavier, as though each step through it carried me deeper into something unseen. I began to cover the mirror at night with a blanket, tucking the fabric tightly around the frame. For a while, it gave me peace. I could walk the hallway without the dread of catching her gaze. But then I started to hear it. The sound of tapping. Light, deliberate taps against the glass. Fingernails striking the surface, a rhythm too steady to mistake for accident. Always after midnight, always when the house was silent. I would stand frozen in my room, ears straining, the sound echoing faintly down the hall. Tap, 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 as though she was testing the barrier, as though she was waiting. One night, unable to bear it, I tore the blanket away and stared directly into the mirror. She was there. Her face was pressed close to the surface now, so close I could see the cracks in her skin, the fissures running along her lips, the brittle strands of her hair clinging like wet seaweed. Her eyes were endless voids, pulling me in, and her mouth moved soundless, shaping words I could not hear but felt in the marrow of my bones. The tapping grew louder, though her hands never moved. It reverberated in my skull, my chest, until I slammed my fists against the frame and stumbled back. The mirror rattled on its hook, but the image did not waver. She only smiled, a thin curve that split her pale face like a wound. Since that night, I haven't removed the covering again. But the taps continue, sometimes soft, sometimes violent, shaking the wall, rattling through the studs of the house. The smell of copper has spread into other rooms. The temperature drops without warning, the air so cold my breath clouds in front of me. I've stopped sleeping in my childhood bedroom. I moved a mattress into the living room, far from the mirror, though still the sense of being watched never leaves. Even when my eyes are closed, even when I try to convince myself the house is silent, I can feel her standing in that hallway, pressing against the glass, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. Sometimes I dream of her. In the dreams, I walk down the hallway and the mirror is uncovered, glowing faintly, like a pool of black water. She stands within it, closer each time. Her lips move, her eyes never leave mine. And in the dream, I know she's telling me something. I wake before I can understand the words, heart racing, body damp with sweat, the faint metallic tang still coating the back of my throat. I fear the day I understand what she's saying. And I fear the night when the glass finally gives way, when the tapping turns to shattering, and the hallway is no longer enough to hold her. Until then, I keep the blanket tied tight around the frame, though I know it doesn't stop her. It never did. The mirror waits. She waits. And every night, I wonder how much longer I can keep pretending it's only a reflection. The thing on the bed, Emily, 21, Maine. I never liked sleeping in that old farmhouse. It stands on the edge of a thinning patch of woods, the kind that loses its density too quickly, leaving bare skeletal trees that sway and creak in the wind. The walls of the house are thin, the insulation little more than dust pressed between boards, so the sounds of the outside world seep in as though nothing separates indoors from out. At night, I could hear everything, the moan of the wind across the empty fields, the scrape of branches against the siding, the restless groan of the house as though it were alive and shifting in its sleep. The first night I moved in, I noticed how heavy the air felt. The house was silent in that suffocating way that only very old buildings can manage, holding stillness like a weight. The smell inside was stale, an earthy tang of mold mixed with wood that had soaked too many seasons of rain. There was always a faint sweetness lingering underneath, like rotting fruit left forgotten in the cellar. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hall. The floorboards there were warped, each step sagging as though it resented the pressure of my weight. The walls were bare plaster cracked into spiderwebs. A single window overlooked the woods, its glass wavy and distorted, bending the view until the trees outside seemed like shifting silhouettes. At night, the room swallowed light whole. Even with a lamp burning, shadows clung to the corners, thick and stubborn, refusing to recede. The bed was pushed against the far wall. Its frame was old iron, painted over too many times, the kind that rattles if you shift too suddenly. The mattress sagged in the middle, as though something heavy had slept there for years without moving. When I first lay down, the springs groaned in protest, and a cold draft swept over me, though the window was shut. That was the first night I felt it. It always began the same way. I would wake suddenly, heart pounding, without knowing why. The air would feel colder, sharp enough to sting my nose, filling my chest with a damp chill that clung to the lungs. The silence of the house would deepen until it was unbearable, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound like thunder. Then the pressure would come, an invisible weight pressing down on my chest, pinning me against the sagging mattress. I couldn't move. I couldn't even lift a finger. My limbs felt leaden, as though filled with sand. My eyes darted frantically around the room, but my head refused to turn. The shadows seemed to swell, gathering at the edges of the ceiling, thickening like storm clouds. And then I would see it. At the foot of the bed, crouched low, was the outline of something darker than the shadows that birthed it. A figure, bent and twisted, its limbs too long, its body hunched as though it were folded in on itself. It never moved quickly. It would just sit there, crouched, head angled down, the sense of its stare heavy and unrelenting. I could never make out its face. Not clearly. The darkness clung too tightly to it, smearing its features into something that defied focus. But I could feel its attention. Every time I tried to breathe, the pressure on my chest grew heavier, as if my breath itself provoked it. The first time, I told myself it was sleep paralysis, a nightmare, the mind playing cruel tricks while the body lay helpless. That's what the rational part of me clung to when morning came and the shadows thinned, leaving behind only the stale smell of the room and the faint impression of weight in the mattress. But it kept happening. Night after night, always closer to the same hour, 3 a.m., when the world outside seemed dead, when no bird stirred, no wind blew, when even the insects had gone silent. I would wake, feel the cold rush of air, the pressing silence, and then the weight on my chest. My eyes would roll down to the foot of the bed, and there it would be, crouched and waiting. Sometimes it shifted. I would hear the faint squeak of the bed frame, feel the mattress dip slightly under a weight that was not mine. Once, its shadow seemed to stretch along the wall, elongating, reaching up toward the ceiling, the limbs stretching unnaturally thin, as though it were testing the shape of the room. The smell changed too. At first, it was only the damp, moldy scent of the house. But when it appeared, the air soured. A copper tang, sharp and biting like rusted iron. Sometimes it was stronger, filling my throat until I wanted to gag, but my body would not obey. The worst part wasn't the weight or the silence. It was the awareness. I knew with every fiber of my being that it was aware of me, that it wanted me awake, wanted me to see it. The thing on the bed wasn't content to linger in the corner of dreams. It needed my eyes open, my fear alive and fresh. One night it moved. The usual heaviness woke me, the usual cold pinning me down. I rolled my eyes downward, expecting to see its crouched form at the foot of the bed. But this time it was closer. It had crept forward, its limbs folded grotesquely, its body pressed low, like an animal ready to pounce. Its head tilted at an angle too sharp to belong to anything human, neck bent so far that I thought it might snap. It was staring directly at me. The mattress dipped, heavier now, closer to my legs. I could feel the springs strain, the weight crawling up inch by inch. My chest tightened until I could barely draw breath. The smell of copper filled my nose, thick and choking, as though the air itself was rotting. My vision blurred, tears welling in my eyes, but I couldn't close them. I couldn't look away. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the weight lifted. The cold thinned. The room lightened, shadows retreating back to the corners. My body released, trembling violently, lungs burning with the air I dragged in. When I finally dared to glance at the mattress, there was a deep impression at the foot of the bed, the kind left by something heavy that had sat there for a long, long time. Morning brought no comfort. I tried to tell myself again that it was a nightmare, some cruel trick of the mind. But the bed frame still groaned when I touched it. The metal still rattled with echoes of a weight that wasn't mine. The smell lingered in the room long after sunlight bled through the window. I started to dread nightfall. Each evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the shadows bled into the corners of the farmhouse, my chest tightened with the anticipation of it. No matter how I tried, staying awake, leaving the lamp on, playing music to fill the silence, it always found a way. Always waiting until the house was dead still, until my guard slipped, until my body succumbed to the heaviness of sleep. And then I would wake, helpless, pinned beneath its weight. The thing on the bed is patient. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to. It knows I cannot fight it, cannot run. All it has to do is wait, crouched at the foot of the bed, closer each night, until eventually there is nowhere left for me to retreat. I don't know what it wants. I only know it isn't finished. And each night, as I lie frozen, chest crushed beneath invisible hands, eyes locked on the darkness gathering at the end of the bed, I wonder how much closer it will come before it finally decides to climb all the way up.